The red dust of Kepler 442b swirled around Dr. Amanda Ross as she knelt beside the excavation site. The alien sun cast long shadows across the dig, making the ancient ruins look even more mysterious than usual. She had been leading this archaeological expedition for 3 months now, and every day brought new surprises from this long-dead civilization. Amanda wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked at the team working around her. Jake Martinez was carefully brushing dirt away from what looked like a piece of carved stone, his usual grin replaced by intense concentration. Dr. Lisa Park was taking photographs of the strange symbols they had found on the walls, while Tony, Blake, and Carol White were setting up the ground-penetrating radar for tomorrow's deeper scan. The settlement they were excavating was unlike anything humanity had ever found. The buildings were made from a material that seemed to shift between stone and metal depending on the light. The architecture followed no earthly logic, with rooms that seemed to flow into each other like water. But it was the artifacts that truly fascinated Amanda. Tools that looked almost familiar but served unknown purposes, containers that seemed to hold nothing but felt heavy, and artwork that made her eyes water if she looked at it too long. "Dr. Ross, you need to see this," Jake called out from his section of the dig. His voice carried that particular tone that meant he had found something important. Amanda made her way over to where Jake was working. He had been assigned to what they called the Central Plaza, a large open area surrounded by the remains of tall structures. For weeks, he had been carefully removing centuries of accumulated dirt and debris, revealing more and more of the original surface. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to what he had uncovered. "I think it's some kind of statue or sculpture." Amanda knelt down beside him and felt her breath catch. Emerging from the red dirt was what appeared to be a face. But it was not quite human, not quite anything she could identify. The features were elongated and delicate, with high cheekbones and a narrow chin. The eyes were closed, but they seemed too large for the face, as if they might hold secrets of the universe. "Keep going," Amanda said softly, "but be very careful." Over the next several hours, Jake worked methodically to reveal more of the sculpture. The other team members gathered around as the full figure emerged from its earthen tomb. It was nearly 7 feet tall, carved from a crystalline material that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The surface was covered in intricate patterns that might have been decorations or might have been some form of writing. The being depicted was humanoid, but clearly not human. Its limbs were longer and more graceful than any human's, and its proportions suggested a species that had evolved under different conditions. The sculpture wore what looked like robes or flowing garments, carved so realistically that Amanda could almost feel the fabric. "This is incredible," Lisa whispered, taking photograph after photograph. "The level of detail is extraordinary. Look at the way the artist captured the texture of the skin, the individual fingers, even what looks like hair." Amanda nodded, but something about the sculpture made her uneasy. It was too perfect, too lifelike. Most ancient art, even the most skilled, had a certain stiffness to it. This looked like it might open its eyes and speak at any moment. "We need to carbon date the surrounding materials," she said. "And I want a full spectral analysis of this crystalline material. I've never seen anything like it." Tony approached with his scanner. "The material is showing some unusual properties," he said, frowning at his readings. "It's not quite mineral, not quite organic. The scanner can't seem to get a solid reading on its composition." Carol joined them, her quantum physics background making her particularly interested in unusual materials. "The way it reflects light is fascinating," she said. "It's almost like it's bending the photons in ways that shouldn't be possible." Jake stepped back from his work, brushing dirt from his hands. "You know, it's weird. I keep feeling like it's watching us. I know that sounds crazy, but every time I look at it, I get this feeling that it's aware of what we're doing." Amanda had been thinking the same thing, but hadn't wanted to voice it. There was something about the sculpture that seemed alive, despite being carved from stone or crystal or whatever this material was, and the way the light played across its surface made it seem to breathe. The closed eyes looked like they were simply resting, not the blank stone of typical statuary. "We'll call it the Sentinel," she decided. "It does seem to be watching over this place." The team spent the rest of the day documenting the sculpture and the immediate area around it. The base was carved with even more intricate patterns, and Amanda was beginning to suspect that these weren't decorative at all. They looked almost like some kind of technical diagram or perhaps a map of some sort. As the alien sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Amanda called for the team to secure the site for the night. They covered the sculpture with protective sheeting and set up the motion sensors that would alert them if anything disturbed the excavation. "Dr. Ross," Jake said as they walked back to the temporary shelters they had erected near the dig site, "what do you think happened to them? The beings who built this place?" Amanda looked back at the covered sculpture, its shape still visible beneath the white sheeting. "I don't know," she said honestly. "There's no sign of warfare, no evidence of disease or disaster. It's like they just left or disappeared." That night, as Amanda reviewed the day's findings in her field notes, she found herself thinking about Jake's question. The settlement was clearly very old, possibly 1,000 years or more based on the sediment layers and the few organic materials they had found. But it was also clearly abandoned deliberately. The buildings were sealed, the artifacts were carefully stored, and everything suggested a planned departure. Rather than a hasty evacuation, she looked at the photos of the sculpture on her tablet. Even in the photographs, there was something unsettling about it. The face was peaceful, almost serene, but there was something in the set of the mouth, the angle of the head, that suggested the being was not truly at rest. Amanda made a note to contact the colonial authorities in the morning. They would need xenorchaeology specialists, maybe even xenobiologists, if they could determine what species had created this place. This was clearly the most significant archaeological find in human history, and she wanted to make sure they handled it properly. As she prepared for sleep, Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that the sculpture was still watching, even covered and secured as it was. She told herself it was just her imagination, the result of too many long days in the alien sun and too much excitement about the discovery. But deep down, she wondered if Jake was right. If somehow, impossibly, the Sentinel was aware of their presence and was waiting for something to happen. 3 weeks had passed since the discovery of the Sentinel, and the excavation site had become a hub of activity. Dr. Amanda Ross watched as specialists from across the colony worked around the ancient sculpture. The crystalline figure had been fully excavated now, revealing its complete form in all its mysterious glory. Jake Martinez had become something of a local celebrity among the team. His discovery of the sculpture had earned him praise from the colonial authorities, and he was enjoying the attention perhaps a little too much. He had started giving informal tours to visiting scientists, always ending his presentation with the same joke. "And here we have our sleeping beauty," Jake would say with a theatrical gesture toward the sculpture. "I keep telling everyone that. If someone kissed it, maybe it would wake up and tell us all the secrets of the universe." The joke had become a running gag among the team members. Carol White would roll her eyes whenever Jake told it, while Tony Blake would chuckle and shake his head. Dr. Lisa Park had started timing how long it took Jake to work the joke into any conversation about the sculpture. Amanda found the humor helpful in breaking the tension that seemed to surround the dig site. There was something about the Sentinel that made everyone uncomfortable, though no one could quite explain why. Visitors would often comment on feeling watched, and more than one scientist had reported strange dreams after spending time near the sculpture. The analysis of the crystalline material had yielded fascinating but confusing results. It appeared to be neither fully organic nor completely mineral, but something in between. The patterns carved into its surface seemed to shift slightly depending on the angle of observation, and several team members swore they had seen the markings move when they weren't looking directly at them. "It's like the whole thing is alive somehow," Carol had confided to Amanda during one of their evening briefings. "Not alive in any way we understand, but there's definitely some kind of energy signature coming from it." Amanda had been thinking the same thing. The sculpture radiated a presence that went beyond its impressive size and craftsmanship. Sometimes she would catch herself talking to it as if it could hear her, explaining what the team was doing and why they were there. The base of the sculpture had proven to be even more interesting than the figure itself. The patterns carved into the stone beneath the sentinel's feet were clearly technical in nature, resembling circuit diagrams or star maps. Carol and Tony had spent hours trying to decipher them, but the symbols followed no logic they could understand. "It's almost like a manual," Tony had said, pointing to the intricate designs. "Like someone was trying to explain how something works, but we don't have the knowledge to understand what they're trying to say." The evening of the third week brought cause for celebration. The team had successfully mapped the entire settlement, catalogued hundreds of artifacts, and Dr. Ross had received word that their preliminary findings would be published in the Journal of Xenorchaeology. The colonial authority had sent a case of synthetic wine to mark the occasion as the red sun set over the alien landscape. The team gathered around their portable heaters in the temporary shelter they had erected near the dig site. The wine flowed freely and spirits were high. Jake was in particularly fine form, regaling the group with stories of his various archaeological misadventures. "Remember that time on Mars when I accidentally activated that ancient beacon?" Jake said, raising his glass. 3 hours of alien disco music blasting across the Martian plains before we figured out how to turn it off. The team laughed, and Amanda found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. The pressure of leading such an important expedition had been weighing on her, but seeing her team happy and united made all the stress worthwhile. "To the Sentinel," Lisa said, raising her glass toward the covered sculpture. "May it keep all its secrets to itself." "To Sleeping Beauty," Jake added with a grin. "May she continue to get her beauty sleep." As the evening wore on and the wine continued to flow, Jake's jokes became more elaborate and theatrical. He began acting out scenarios where the sculpture would wake up and demand to know why humans were disturbing its rest. The team found his performance hilarious, encouraging him to become more and more dramatic. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake announced, standing up with exaggerated formality, "I have decided that it is time to test my theory about our ancient friend." Amanda looked up from her conversation with Carol. "What theory would that be?" "The true love's kiss theory," Jake said with a theatrical bow. "I propose to wake up Sleeping Beauty with a kiss, just like in the old fairy tales." The team erupted in laughter and cheers. Someone started chanting, "Do it," and soon the entire group had joined in. Amanda knew she should probably stop this before it got out of hand, but the wine and the celebratory atmosphere made her judgment cloudy. "I don't think that's such a good idea," she said. But her protest was half-hearted and was quickly drowned out by the team's encouragement. Jake made his way over to the sculpture, pulling away the protective covering with a flourish. The Sentinel stood revealed in the light of their portable lamps, its crystalline surface gleaming. The alien figure looked even more lifelike in the flickering light, and Amanda felt a chill run down her spine. "Behold," Jake announced in his best dramatic voice, "I shall awaken our ancient friend with true love's kiss." The team continued to cheer him on, though Amanda noticed that Lisa looked a bit concerned. Tony was recording everything on his personal device, while Carol watched with scientific curiosity. Jake approached the sculpture and placed his hands on either side of its face. The crystalline material felt warm to the touch, which surprised him. He had expected it to be cold like stone, but it seemed to pulse with its own inner warmth. "Here goes nothing," he said. Looking back at his teammates one last time, Jake leaned forward and pressed his lips against the sculpture's mouth. The crystalline surface was smooth and warm, almost like real skin. For a moment, nothing happened, and Jake started to pull back with a sheepish grin. Then the world exploded in blue light. A pulse of energy erupted from the sculpture, spreading outward in waves that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The team was thrown backward by the force of it, their equipment scattered across the dig site. The light grew brighter and brighter until it was impossible to look directly at the source. And then, impossibly, the sculpture's eyes opened. They were not the blank stone eyes Amanda had expected, but swirling galaxies of light and color that seemed to contain the depths of space itself. The Sentinel's mouth opened and a voice spoke directly into their minds, bypassing their ears entirely. "Foolish child," the voice said, carrying the weight of centuries. "You have doomed your species." The blue light faded slowly, leaving the team scattered across the dig site like broken dolls. Dr. Amanda Ross pushed herself up from the red dirt, her ears ringing and her vision blurry. The wine from their celebration had been replaced by cold fear as she looked at what had once been their ancient sculpture. The being that now stood before them was no longer crystalline and still. Its form had become fluid and organic, tall and graceful in ways that hurt to look at directly. The patterns on its surface moved like living tattoos, shifting and changing as Amanda watched. The galaxy eyes fixed on each team member in turn, and she felt her mind being examined by something vast and ancient. Jake Martinez lay on his back near the base of the sculpture, his face pale with shock. His lips still tingled from the kiss that had somehow brought this creature to life. He tried to speak but only managed to make small choking sounds as he stared up at the being he had awakened. "What have you done?" Dr. Lisa Park whispered, struggling to sit up. Blood trickled from her nose, and her hands shook as she reached for her fallen camera. The being turned its attention to her, and Lisa felt the weight of its gaze like a physical pressure. When it spoke, its voice filled their minds without using sound, carrying emotions and images that human language could not express. "I am Zarathul," the entity said, and with the name came flashes of memory that were not their own. Ancient cities floating in space, beings of light and energy, and something else lurking in the darkness between stars. "I am a guardian of the veil, one of the last of the Aetherian race." Amanda forced herself to stand, her scientific training fighting against the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. "What do you mean we doomed our species?" she asked, surprised that her voice came out steady. Zarathul moved with liquid grace, its form shifting between solid and translucent. "The vessel you call a sculpture was not art, human. It was a prison, a containment system designed to hold something far worse than death itself." Tony Blake had managed to crawl behind a piece of excavation equipment, his military training telling him to find cover even though he had no idea what they were facing. "What was in the prison?" he called out. The Guardian's form rippled with what might have been sadness or regret. "Not what was in it, but what it was keeping out. Your friend's touch has broken the seal that held closed a doorway to the space between dimensions. The Devourers will soon know that this pathway exists." Carol White pulled herself to her feet, her quantum physics background making her more curious than afraid. "Devourers? What are they?" Images flooded their minds then, visions that made them all cry out in horror. Creatures of shadow and hunger that existed in the spaces between realities, feeding on the life force of entire species. They saw worlds going dark, star systems drained of all energy, and the screaming silence of civilizations consumed. "They are older than your son," Zarathul continued, its mental voice heavy with ancient pain. "They exist in the void between dimensions, always hungry, always searching for ways to break through into our reality. My people discovered them 1,000 years ago, when our explorations took us too far into the deep spaces of the universe." Jake finally found his voice, though. It came out as barely a whisper. "How do we stop them?" The Guardian's laugh was like the sound of stars dying. "Stop them? Child, my entire civilization tried to stop them. The Aetherians were masters of space and time, builders of wonders that spanned galaxies. We had technology that could reshape reality itself, and still they nearly destroyed us." Amanda felt her knees go weak, but she forced herself to stay upright. "Nearly destroyed? Then you found a way to fight them?" "We found a way to delay them," Zarathul corrected. "The Devourers use anchor points to break through from their dimension into ours. These anchors must be placed in locations where the barrier between realities is thin. We managed to locate most of their anchor points and seal them, but the cost was terrible." The Guardian gestured to itself, and they understood that this being had once been something else entirely. Those of us who volunteered to become the SEALs had our consciousness bound to crystalline prisons. We became living locks, our very existence the only thing keeping the doorways closed. But I just kissed you, Jake said, his voice cracking. How could that break something so powerful? Your species is young and chaotic, Zarathil replied, and there was something almost like admiration in its mental voice. Your thoughts and emotions create ripples in the fabric of reality in ways that even we did not fully understand. The touch of a human mind, especially one filled with such innocent joy and humor, was something our SEALs were never designed to withstand. Carol stepped forward, her scientific mind racing. You said the Devourers are coming. How long do we have? The dimensional anchor beneath this site is now active, the Guardian said. It will take time for the Devourers to locate it and break through, but once they do, they will be able to taste the life force of your species. Your Earth, with its billions of humans, will call to them like a beacon. Amanda felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. We have to warn Earth, the colonial authorities, the military, everyone needs to know what's coming. Warn them if you wish, Zarathil said, but your weapons will be useless against the Devourers. They exist partially outside your reality. Physical force cannot touch them, and they feed on fear and despair. The more terror they cause, the stronger they become. Tony emerged from behind his cover, his face grim. Then what do we do? Just wait to die? The Guardian was quiet for a long moment, its form flickering between states of being. There is something unusual about your species, it said finally. In all my years of study, I have never encountered minds quite like yours. You are chaotic and unpredictable in ways that even we Etherians found disturbing. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Lisa asked, still filming despite her shaking hands. It may be your salvation, Zarathil replied. The Devourers feed on ordered thought, on fear and despair and the logical progression of hopelessness. But your minds do not work in logical ways. You find humor in darkness, hope in despair, and meaning in chaos. This confuses them. Amanda felt a spark of hope. Are you saying we might be able to fight them? I am saying that you might be able to do something my people could not, the Guardian said. You might be able to survive contact with them long enough to close the dimensional anchor from within their realm. Jake sat up slowly, his face pale but determined. Within their realm? That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is certain death, Zarathil confirmed. But it is also the only way to permanently close the doorway. The anchor must be destroyed from within the pocket dimension where it originates, and that requires someone who can maintain their sense of self while being psychically assaulted by entities that exist to devour consciousness itself. The team looked at each other, the weight of the situation settling over them like a burial shroud. Amanda made a decision that would change everything. How long do we have to prepare? She asked. 72 hours, Zarathil replied, maybe less. The breach is already beginning to form, and once it reaches critical mass, nothing will be able to stop what comes through. The emergency communication to the colonial authorities had been sent within the first hour of Zarathil's awakening. Dr. Amanda Ross stood in the temporary command center they had set up, watching as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Ships were disappearing along the outer rim colonies. Entire space stations had gone dark, and several deep space monitoring posts were reporting strange readings that made no scientific sense. It's already starting, Amanda said, her voice tight with worry. The dimensional breach is affecting areas light years away from here. Zarathil stood nearby, its form more solid now, but still shifting between states of matter. The Guardian had been working with Carol White and Tony Blake to understand human technology, fascinated by their crude but effective approaches to problems that had stumped the Etherians for centuries. Your species builds things that should not work, Zarathil observed, examining one of their portable computers. Your machines are held together by what you call hope and stubbornness rather than proper engineering principles. Carol looked up from her calculations, her hair wild from running her hands through it. That's not entirely wrong, she admitted. We tend to make things work through sheer determination rather than elegant design. Jake Martinez sat on a crate nearby, still pale from his encounter with the sculpture, but determined to help fix what he had broken. So what's the plan? You said we need to destroy the anchor from inside their dimension. How do we do that? The Guardian's form rippled with what might have been uncertainty. The process requires someone to enter the pocket dimension where the anchor exists. This person must maintain their sense of identity while being assaulted by the devourers themselves. Most minds break within moments of contact. But you think human minds might be different? Tony asked, cleaning his sidearm out of habit even though weapons would be useless against their enemies. Human minds are chaotic in ways that may confuse the devourers, Zarathil replied. Where other species think in ordered patterns, you think in contradictions and paradoxes. Where others see logic, you see humor. Where others feel despair, you feel spite. Dr. Lisa Park looked up from her equipment. Spite? Your species has a unique relationship with hopelessness, the Guardian explained. Other races, when faced with certain death, accept their fate with dignity. Humans tend to become angry and stubborn. You refuse to accept defeat even when it is mathematically certain. Amanda felt a strange surge of pride at this description. So our inability to give up might actually be useful for once? More than useful, Zarathil said. It may be the key to survival. The devourers expect fear and despair. They feed on ordered thought and logical progression toward hopelessness. But human minds do not progress logically toward anything. Jake stood up, his decision made. Then I'll go. I'm the one who caused this mess, so I should be the one to fix it. Absolutely not, Amanda said immediately. You're not going anywhere near that pocket dimension. With respect, Dr. Ross, Jake replied. I'm the one who kissed the sculpture. I'm the one who broke the seal. This is my responsibility, Carol looked up from her work. Actually, the quantum mechanics involved suggest that it might need to be. Jake, the dimensional breach was created by his specific action, his specific mental state at that moment. There might be a resonance effect that would make him more effective at closing it. Zarathil's form brightened with interest. The human is correct. The one who opened the door would have the strongest connection to the anchor point. But the process will almost certainly kill him. Then we need backup, Amanda said firmly. If Jake is going in there, he's not going alone. Tony stepped forward. I volunteer. I've been in combat situations before. I know how to function under pressure. This isn't combat, Zarathil warned. This is psychological warfare against entities that exist to destroy minds. Your military training may actually work against you, as it relies on logical thinking and ordered responses. Then I'll go too, Carol said. My background in quantum physics might help me understand the dimensional mechanics involved. Amanda looked at her team, these people who had become like family over the months of excavation. We need Pete Johnson from Colonial Security. His background in crisis management could be useful. The more minds that enter the pocket dimension, the more likely at least one will survive, Zarathil agreed. But you must understand that this is not a rescue mission. This is a suicide mission with the slim hope that one of you might live long enough to overload the dimensional anchor. Lisa continued recording everything, her hands steady despite the circumstances. What exactly will they face in there? The Guardian's form darkened. The pocket dimension exists partially in the space between realities. Physical laws do not apply consistently. The devourers will assault their minds with visions of their deepest fears and desires simultaneously. They will show them versions of reality where everything they love is destroyed, where their actions have doomed everyone they care about. Sounds like a typical Tuesday for most humans, Jake said with a weak smile. We're used to feeling like everything is our fault. Zarathil paused, its galaxy eyes fixing on Jake with something that might have been surprise. You make jokes. In the face of certain death? It's kind of what we do, Jake replied. When things get really bad, we either laugh or cry. Laughing is more fun. Fascinating, the Guardian murmured. This response is completely illogical. The devourers will not understand it. Amanda felt a plan beginning to form. You said they feed on fear and despair. What if we don't give them what they're expecting? What do you mean? Carol asked. Jake's right about how humans handle stress. Amanda said. We make jokes, we get angry, we become stubborn and spiteful. What if instead of fighting the psychological assault, we respond to it the way we respond to everything else in our lives? Tony grinned suddenly. You mean treat cosmic horror like a really bad day at work? Exactly, Amanda said. The Devourers are expecting us to break down in terror. Instead, we treat them like annoying customers or difficult bosses. Zarathal's form flickered with what might have been excitement. This approach has never been attempted. The Aetherians always tried to maintain dignity and composure in the face of the Devourers. But dignity and composure are exactly what they feed on. Human dignity's pretty much non-existent anyway, Jake said. We're the species that invented reality TV and pineapple pizza. We gave up on dignity a long time ago. The dimensional anchor can be overloaded by introducing chaotic energy. Patterns, Zarathal explained. Pure human emotion, especially the kind that makes no logical sense, might be enough to cause a cascade failure. Carol was already working on her tablet, running calculations. If we can maintain our chaotic thought patterns while approaching the anchor core, we might be able to create enough quantum interference to destabilize the entire pocket dimension. The question is whether we can stay human long enough to reach the core, Tony said. How long do we have to maintain our sanity? In that place? Time moves differently in the pocket dimension, Zarathal replied. What feels like hours to you will be only minutes in normal space, but those minutes will feel like eternity. Pete Johnson arrived at the dig site just as the sun was setting, having been summoned by Amanda's emergency message. He listened to the briefing with the calm professionalism that had made him the colony's head of security. So, let me get this straight, he said when they finished explaining. We need to enter a dimension full of mind-eating monsters and destroy their anchor point using the power of human stubbornness and inappropriate humor. That's a surprisingly accurate summary, Amanda said. Pete nodded slowly. Well, I've had worse assignments. When do we leave? Zarathal began to glow with the energy needed to create the dimensional bridge. The breach is accelerating. We must act now, or the window of opportunity will close forever. The team gathered their equipment, though most of it would be useless. Where they were going, they had emergency supplies, communication devices that might work across dimensions, and their own human stubbornness. Remember, Amanda said as they prepared to enter the pocket dimension, we're not heroes on a noble quest. We're just people having a really bad day, and we're going to complain about it loudly. The dimensional bridge opened like a wound in the air itself, crackling with energy that made the team's teeth ache. Zarathal stood beside the swirling portal, its form flickering between states of existence as it maintained the connection between realities. Remember, the Guardian said, its mental voice strained from the effort, do not try to make sense of what you see. Logic is your enemy in this place. Trust your instincts and your emotions, no matter how inappropriate they may seem. Jake. Martinez stepped forward first, his face pale but determined. Well, here goes nothing, he said, and walked into the portal before he could lose his nerve. The sensation was like being turned inside out while falling upward. Jake found himself standing in a place that hurt to look at directly. The ground. Beneath his feet was sometimes solid rock, sometimes soft grass, sometimes nothing at all. The sky above shifted between the familiar blue of Earth and the purple of Kepler 442b, occasionally becoming something that wasn't sky at all, but rather the inside of a building, or the surface of an ocean. Dr. Amanda Ross emerged from the portal. Behind him, followed quickly by Tony Blake, Carol White, and Pete Johnson. They stood in a loose circle, each trying to process what they were experiencing. This is impossible, Carol whispered, her scientific mind struggling to categorize what she was seeing. The physical laws here are completely inconsistent. Don't try to analyze it, Amanda warned. Just accept that nothing makes sense and move forward. The landscape around them continued to shift and change. One moment they were standing in what looked like the excavation site on Kepler 442b. The next they were in a forest that might have been from Earth's past. Then suddenly they were inside a building that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. Pete. Johnson checked his weapon out of habit, then remembered it would be useless here. Which way to the dimensional anchor? Before anyone could answer, the Devourers made their presence known. They didn't appear so much as seep into existence, like shadows gaining substance. They had no fixed form, shifting between humanoid shapes and geometric patterns that hurt to perceive directly. "Welcome, little mortals," one of them spoke, its voice like the sound of stars being extinguished. "We have been waiting for you." The psychological assault began immediately. Jake found himself reliving his childhood, but every memory was twisted. His mother's face became a mask of disappointment. His father's voice echoed with accusations of failure. Every mistake he had ever made was magnified and replayed in excruciating detail, but instead of breaking down as the Devourers expected, Jake did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He started laughing. "Oh, come on," he said, addressing the creature that was showing him visions of his life. "Is this the best you can do? My actual childhood was way more embarrassing than this. You forgot the time I wet myself during the school play, and that time I asked my teacher if I could marry her." The Devourer paused, its form flickering with confusion. This was not the response it had expected. Tony Blake was experiencing his own nightmare, reliving battles from his military service, but twisted into scenarios where everyone died because of his failures. But his training kicked in, and he began treating the psychological assault like enemy propaganda. "Nice try," he said to the shadows, showing him his dead comrades. "But I've seen better psychological warfare from drill sergeants. At least they were creative with their insults." Carol White was being shown equations that would drive most mathematicians insane, formulas that described the heat death of the universe and the meaninglessness of existence. But instead of despair, she felt professionally offended. "These calculations are wrong," she said, pulling out her tablet and starting to work. "You're using outdated models of quantum mechanics. The universe isn't going to end like this at all. It's going to end much more interestingly." Pete Johnson was facing visions of every person he had ever failed to protect, every security breach that had happened on his watch, but his response was purely practical. "Yeah, I know about all of these," he said matter-of-factly. "I file reports on this stuff. Do you have any new material, or are we just going to go through my paperwork?" Amanda Ross was being shown the destruction of Earth, the death of humanity, and the meaninglessness of all scientific endeavor. But instead of horror, she felt a familiar academic irritation. "Your data is incomplete," she said, addressing the Devourers as if they were particularly stubborn graduate students. "You're making assumptions about human behavior based on limited observations. Your methodology is flawed." The Devourers recoiled as if struck. In all their eons of existence, they had never encountered minds that responded to existential terror with criticism, annoyance, and professional disappointment. "You are not afraid," one of them said, its voice wavering. "Of course we're afraid," Jake replied, still walking forward through the shifting landscape. "We're terrified. But fear doesn't mean we have to be impressed by your presentation." The team continued moving through the pocket dimension, following an instinctive sense of direction toward what they hoped was the dimensional anchor. The Devourers followed them, growing more agitated with each failed attempt to break their spirits. They showed Amanda visions of her team dying horribly, but she responded by taking notes on the creature's anatomy. They showed Tony scenes of global warfare, but he critiqued their tactical knowledge. They showed Carol the mathematical proof that love and hope were illusions, but she found errors in their work and started correcting them. "This is fascinating," Carol said, still working on her tablet while walking through a landscape that was simultaneously a desert and an ocean. "They're trying to induce despair through logical argument, but their logic is fundamentally flawed." Pete Johnson was dealing with visions of his worst failures by treating them like incident reports. "Yeah, that was Tuesday. Wednesday was worse. Do you have anything from last week?" The Devourer's forms began to flicker more rapidly, their assault becoming more desperate. They showed the team visions of their loved ones dying, their homes being destroyed, their entire species being consumed. You know what? Jake said, his voice growing stronger. I'm getting really tired of this. We get it, you're scary monsters. From beyond space and time. But honestly, you're not that different from every other problem we've ever faced. You're just another thing that wants to make our lives miserable. And we're pretty good at dealing with things that want to make our lives miserable, Tony added. We've had practice. The landscape around them began to stabilize as they approached the core of the pocket dimension. Ahead of them, they could see the dimensional anchor, a structure that defied description but somehow looked exactly like what they expected a dimensional anchor to look like. There it is, Amanda said, pointing toward the pulsing mass of energy and impossible geometry. Now we just need to figure out how to overload it. The Devourers made one last desperate attempt to stop them, surrounding the team with visions of absolute despair and hopelessness. But the humans had found their rhythm now, responding to cosmic horror with the same stubborn refusal to be impressed that they brought to every other aspect of their lives. Is this seriously the best you can do? Carol asked, looking up from her calculations. Because I've seen scarier things in peer review. The Devourers' forms began to waver and fade, their confusion growing with each inappropriately human response to their assault. They had never encountered a species that treated existential dread as a minor inconvenience and cosmic horror as a subject for constructive criticism. As the team approached the dimensional anchor, they could feel the chaotic energy of their own minds beginning to resonate with the structure's quantum field. Their refusal to be properly terrified was creating interference patterns that the anchor couldn't process. Whatever we're doing, Amanda said, it's working. The anchor is starting to destabilize. Good, Jake said, his voice filled with determination. Let's finish this and go home. I'm getting really tired of being in this place. The dimensional anchor loomed before them like a living nightmare made of mathematics and hunger. It pulsed with energy that made reality itself seem to bend and warp around it. The structure defied every law of physics that Carol White had ever learned, existing in too many dimensions at once while somehow being perfectly visible to human eyes. That's it, Dr. Amanda Ross said, her voice steady despite the cosmic horror before them. That's what's been letting the Devourers into our reality. The primary Devourer materialized in front of the anchor, larger and more terrible than the others they had encountered. Its form was a writhing mass of shadow and teeth, with eyes that held the darkness between stars. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of eons and the finality of death itself. You have come far, little mortals, it said, its words echoing through dimensions. But you are too late. The anchor is already fully activated. Your reality will be consumed, your species will feed us for millennia, and your universe will become as empty as the void between worlds. The creature began to show them visions of Earth's destruction, of billions of humans being drained of life and consciousness. They saw their families, their friends, their entire civilization reduced to nothing but food for entities that existed to devour. But Jake Martinez did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He looked at the cosmic horror responsible for threatening his entire species and felt not terror but annoyance. You know what? He said, stepping forward. I am really getting sick of your attitude. The Devourer paused, its form flickering with confusion. What? Your attitude? Jake repeated, his voice growing stronger. You show up here acting all high and mighty, telling us how doomed we are, how powerful you are, how meaningless our existence is. But you know what? I've had bad days before. Tony Blake stepped up beside Jake, his military bearing making him look oddly dignified in the face of cosmic horror. Yeah, this is just another Monday for us. We've dealt with worse. Worse? The Devourer asked, its ancient mind struggling to process this response. Sure, Carol White said, pulling out her tablet and continuing her calculations even as reality warped around them. I've had to deal with grant applications, peer review, and university administration. You're scary, but you're not that scary. Pete Johnson nodded in agreement. I've worked in customer service. I've dealt with angry colonists who haven't had their garbage collected on time. You're just another complaint waiting to be filed. The Devourer's form began to writhe more frantically. You do not understand. I am the end of all things. I am the darkness that consumes light. I am the silence that follows the last scream. And I'm a guy who once had to explain to his mom why he dropped out of engineering school to become an archaeologist. Jake replied, "We all have our problems." Amanda found herself laughing despite the situation. You know what the funny thing is? We're probably going to die here. Our species might actually be doomed. But I can't help thinking that at least we're going out on our own terms. The Devourer recoiled as if struck. You should be begging for mercy. You should be weeping in despair. Why? Carol asked, looking up from her work. Would that make you feel better about yourself? Because honestly, that's kind of pathetic. The primary Devourer's form began to flicker and fade, its confusion growing with each human response. It had existed for eons, consuming countless civilizations, but it had never encountered a species that treated existential dread as a minor inconvenience. Besides, Jake continued, approaching the dimensional anchor, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about how I doomed my species by kissing that sculpture. Your actions broke the seal, the Devourer said, its voice wavering. You opened the door that should have remained closed forever. Maybe, Jake said, reaching out to touch the anchor. But you know what? I kissed that sculpture as a joke. I did it because I thought it would be funny. And if I'm going to doom my species, I'm going to do it with the same spirit. The other team members gathered around the anchor, each placing their hands on its impossible surface. The structure began to pulse more rapidly, its energy patterns becoming chaotic and unstable. What are you doing? The Devourer demanded, its form becoming more frantic. We're overloading your anchor, Amanda said matter-of-factly. Carol figured out that if we introduce enough chaotic human emotion into the quantum field, it should cause a cascade failure. But that will destroy you all, probably, Tony agreed. But it'll also destroy your anchor, and apparently that's enough to shut down all the others across the galaxy. So really, we're getting a pretty good deal. The Devourer began to retreat, its form becoming less solid. This is impossible. You cannot defeat us with humor and stubbornness. Watch us, Pete said, his voice filled with the same determination he brought to every security crisis. We're humans. We specialize in doing impossible things out of sheer spite. The dimensional anchor began to crack, its structure unable to handle the chaotic energy patterns created by 5 humans who refused to be properly terrified. The Devourers around them started to fade, their forms becoming transparent as the anchor that connected them to this reality began to fail. You're all insane. The primary Devourer screamed, its voice growing fainter. Yeah, probably, Jake admitted. But we're insane in a way that apparently breaks your entire invasion plan, so I'm calling it a win. Carol looked up from her tablet, her face bright with scientific excitement. The cascade failure is spreading. The quantum interference is propagating through the dimensional network. Every anchor connected to this one is destabilizing. The pocket dimension began to collapse around them, reality folding in on itself as the anchor's destruction created a chain reaction that spread across space and time. The Devourer's screams echoed through dimensions as their carefully constructed invasion plan crumbled. We did it, Amanda said, her voice filled with wonder. We actually did it. But their celebration was cut short as the dimensional collapse accelerated. The pocket dimension was tearing itself apart, and they were trapped in the middle of it. Zarathul better have that dimensional bridge ready, Tony said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. Jake looked at his teammates, these people, who had followed him into cosmic horror armed with nothing but human stubbornness and inappropriate humor. You know what? Even if we don't make it out of here, I'm proud of what we accomplished. We saved the universe by being annoying, Carol said, her voice filled with academic satisfaction. I'm definitely putting that on my resume. The pocket dimension gave one final shudder and began to collapse completely. But just as the last of reality started to fold in on itself, They felt the pull of Zarathal's dimensional bridge. Yanking them back toward their own reality, they tumbled out of the portal and onto the red dirt of Kepler 442b, gasping and disoriented but alive. Zarathal stood over them, its form brighter than they had ever seen it. "It is done," the Guardian said, its mental voice filled with something that might have been joy. "The dimensional anchors are destroyed. The Devourers are cut off from this reality, perhaps forever." Jake sat up slowly, his head spinning. "We actually survived that?" "Your species continues to amaze me," Zarathal replied. "You defeated entities that destroyed my civilization by treating them like a minor inconvenience. You saved your universe by refusing to take cosmic horror seriously." Amanda stood up, brushing dirt from her clothes. "So what happens now?" "Now," the Guardian said, "you return to your lives. But the galaxy will remember what humanity accomplished. Here, you have proven that sometimes the best way to face the darkness is to laugh at it." As they packed up their equipment and prepared to leave the excavation site, Jake took one last look at the empty space where the sculpture had stood. "You know," he said, "I think I'm going to stick to kissing humans from now on." The team laughed, and the sound echoed across the alien landscape, a purely human response to surviving the impossible. They had saved the universe not through noble sacrifice or superior technology, but through the simple act of refusing to be impressed by cosmic horror. It was, Amanda thought, the most human thing they could have done.